Dear first semester optional English students, today I start with the function of literature. The function of literature. What is the function of literature? What you learn and what you get when you read literature? Or what is the use of literature? So, to know this in a systematic way, let us come to study this chapter, the function of literature. I have already explained about the concept of literature and its meaning. Today, let us ask a question. How the concepts and function of literature change in the course of time? If you go back the 2000 years and in a course of time and consider now, so then what was the concept, what was the function of literature in those times? And coming now, the present day, let us ask the function of literature, the nature and function of literature. So that's why it's a question, how the conceptions of the nature and the function of literature change in the course of history, in the course of time. So here it is not an easy answer. In the earlier times, all branches, history, geography, astronomy, astrology, whatever the writing it is called, considered as literature. But today, the word literature has been isolated, separated, and got its meaning very clearly. That's why, to give this answer, to give the answer to this question, so it has not changed even today. The concept and the function of the literature has not changed. So let us discuss here. Then what is the function of literature? The function of literature is to get the pleasure, to get the information, to get more and more knowledge. And it gives us the greater thing than any other writings, that is pleasure. So that's why here aesthetics. Aesthetics is the study of beauty. The history of aesthetics might almost be summarized as a dialectic. Dialectic means it is to discuss. It is considered to discuss, in which thesis and counter thesis are harasses, dulls yet utile. So let us discuss the history of aesthetics. So if you go to study the history of aesthetics, means the literature. So we have the thesis and counter thesis, supposing and opposing ideas, in which we find Horace's opinion and Horace's dulls et utile. Dulls et utile means it is sweetness and usefulness. In the history of the aesthetics or in literature, you can find the sweetness and usefulness. That's why literature is sweet and useful. It is sweet and useful. The view that literature is pleasure giving, analogous to any other pleasures. It's a compared and it is something different than any other pleasures when we read other books, other writings. So answer to view that literature is instruction. So literature, the function of literature is to instruct. The function of literature is to give knowledge. The function of literature is to provide the pleasure, that is the higher pleasure, enjoyment, entertainment. So we read history, we get the knowledge, but whatever the higher pleasure that is available in literature cannot be available in history book. The view that all literature is or should be propaganda is answered by the view that it is or should be pure and sound image. It should be pure and a very sound image. Arabesque means Arabic without reference to the world of human emotions, not even considering the human emotions. That's what the view. So this is how we get the literary literature meaning and its functions in a thesis. And there are counter theses, opposing views. The opposing views, theses are that art is play and that it is work. Art is a play. It is a work. Art is nothing but literary art. It is a play. It is a work. Neither view in isolation. So that's why it should be viewed in keeping it isolated. Can possibly seem acceptable. Told that literature is a play, spontaneous amusement. It gives a continuous amusement. We feel that justice has been done neither to the care, skill, and planning of the artist, nor to the seriousness and importance of the poem. But whether it gives the seriousness and its justice as according to the expectations of the writer of the poem or not. But told that literature is work or craft, we feel the violence done to its joy, what Kant called its purposefulness. We must describe the function of art in such a way as to do justice at once. So function of literature, we can say it is to do justice at once to the sweetness and usefulness. Justice to the sweetness and usefulness. To playfulness and workmanship. So that's why the Horatian formula here, Horace, what he described. So his formula itself offers a helpful start. The usefulness of art need not thought to lie in the enforcement of a moral lesson. So what is usefulness here? It cannot impose any moral, impose any moral lesson. It cannot impose any moral lesson. So here the word useful is equivalent to not a waste of time. Useful means not a waste of time. Not a form of passing the time. Not a form of passing the time, but it is not the waste of time. Useful means not the waste of time. Something deserving of serious attention. Sweet is equivalent to, what is the meaning of sweet? Sweet is equivalent to not a bore, not a duty, but to its own reward. So that's why sweet is its own reward. So when a work of literature functions successfully, and a work of literature provides all its functions successfully, the two things of pleasure and utility, these are the two notes. Pleasure and utility should not merely coexist. They may not coexist, but they coalesce. Coalesce means form into a mass. They coalesce. They do not coexist, but they coalesce. They form into a mass. And the pleasure of literature we need to maintain is not one preference among a list of possible pleasures, because there are so many pleasures. The function of literature is not just, possible pleasures, but it's a higher pleasure. It's not expecting this pleasure, this pleasure, this pleasure, not to need any list, any kinds. But the function of literature is nothing but it is the higher pleasure. It is the higher pleasure than the pleasure you get from other arts, means other books, other writings. Because pleasure in a higher kind of activity. So we get the pleasure from this activity. This activity is a higher kind of activity, that is non-acquisitive contemplation. So it is more thinking about, more contemplation. And the utility, the seriousness, the instructive of literature is a pleasurable seriousness. It is a pleasurable seriousness. That is not the seriousness of the duty. Pleasurable seriousness means not the seriousness of the duty which must be done or of a lesson to be learned, but an aesthetic seriousness. Aesthetic seriousness is very important here. A seriousness of perfection. What? It is the perfection. So that's why literature, its function is to provide the higher pleasure. The higher pleasure, the pleasure, it is from the seriousness and seriousness of perfection.